So, Matt, thank you so much for being here on the Arcade Attack podcast. It's a real pleasure and honour to have you here, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Really quickly, let's get right down to your earliest memories and fondest memories of playing video games. Was there any games that you loved playing as a kid? What are your early memories?
Well, I sort of saw the birth of video games, so I was always a gamer.
Yeah.
Early in my writing career, I did some solo modules published for Dungeons and Dragons and DC Heroes and Call of Cthulhu. Any role-playing gamers out there will know all those systems.
Yeah.
And also, I did some board games. I did a board game based on Lone Wolf and Cub, which was a bit controversial, but it was a double solitaire game. It's for two people to play by themselves.
Oh, nice.
A little weird, but it has its fans and it has people. The rules editing wasn't the best. So anyhow, I was always a gamer. Always, most of college, rather than go to class, I'd stay up to 4 a.m. playing games.
Yeah.
And but I guess I was teaching, and it was about that time that Atari and the first Odyssey came out. And Odyssey I'd have to do the research. The first Odyssey system may have come out before Atari. And it basically had ping pong, Pong, a version of Pong, and various other things like that.
Yeah.
And that was my first taste of video games. And it wasn't until, in terms of working on them, I started reviewing games for Analog Science Fiction Magazine and Isaac Asimov's Science Fiction Magazine. I became a contributing editor at Games Magazine.
Oh, nice.
So I saw every game, every computer game, every video game. I did that when Nintendo tried to reintroduce the video game system by having the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Of course, yeah.
This was after the Atari had gone down in flames post E.T.
Yeah.
I did a review that basically I said, this may be a game changer, because everyone thought video games were dead.
Yeah.
It was a fad, the hula hoop. It was like the hula hoop, or you think of the fad was over. And I did this review, and they put it in their press kit for the Consumer Electronics Show. And it really was the re-emergence of the video game, largely because they put a robot in there. And the robot was almost like, what's the expression they use? I think Hitchcock used it. It's like the wiener. You look and say, oh, it's got a robot, so it's not the old video game.
Yeah.
And the robot, you could have the robot too. Eventually the robot went away. This little thing that you could stack things, you could grab things. And it was quite cute. I don't know how you get one today, but, and that brought back the video game system. But the first time, I'm rattling on here, so feel free
That's
to
all right.
say, shut up. We don't want a history lesson here.
No, I'm really interested, definitely.
So, but the first time I actually wrote a video game or computer game was, you actually didn't even answer your question, which is what's some of my favorites. But I played all the Ultima series back in terms of computer games, and I loved those first Nintendo games, which were great. And there's some games that, like Activision did an early Aliens game, which though the graphics are like minimal, it was an excellent game. But I had become a novelist. I was writing horror novels, and some people out in Oregon contacted me and said, we're looking for a writer who does horror, and your name was mentioned, recommended. And I said, well, yes, that's true, but also I'm a gamer. I design games, I write role-playing games, I review games. And so that's how my involvement with Seventh Guest began.
Brilliant. I mean, that's your two your two real loves, I assume, collided then. It must have been amazing.
Well, it was great because they came not knowing that. They wanted someone who's going to write a horror story to build the story of Seventh Guest. Yeah. But they got much more than that. Yeah. And so, and which I think, Rob and Graham, who are the founders of the company, Rob Landeris and Graham Devine would admit. And it changed, Seventh Guest certainly changed the trajectory of my life.
Brilliant. I mean, the Seventh Guest, we can't understate how important that game was, because before the Seventh Guest, It was discs, wasn't it? Loads of discs. This was one of the first proper CD-ROM games ever released. So it was a bit of a game changer as well. So much in that game, and it must have been quite an amazing time to work on, I assume.
Well, yeah, and there were people who said they weren't going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
I can remember at an early CES, the people from the parent company, which was called Virgin, they had a wing, you know, same Branson brand, but they had a wing called Virgin Mastertronic, and people were saying you're not going to be able to do 40 frames per second of video in a game. It's impossible. So there was a sense of, yes, we're making history if it actually gets made.
Wow.
It actually happens. And of course, it wasn't back then, as became the standard for games, you know, hitting a date where it's due did not actually really occur. It always get pushed back. But then it came out and everyone said, wow, there it is. And people looked at it and they had never seen anything like that before.
It blew I remember playing at my uncle's house and it blew my mind. I hadn't, you know, like you said, nothing like that had really come out before. It was the graphics were amazing. The story was brilliant. The puzzles were really well thought out. It was the whole package. It must have been amazing to be working on that.
Well, it really was. I mean, I've had like 3 or 4 creative highlights. That's probably the top one.
Yeah.
Because it was such a game changer, along with Myst. I mean, Myst was also a game changer. They were sort of concurrent.
Yeah.
Myst being also a puzzle-based game.
That's right.
I mean, after that, it was like you did Seventh Guess. You worked in Seventh Guess. It was like, you know, you were catapulted into a very rarefied atmosphere. And the company went from, when I started with them, it was like 3 or 4 people. Rob Stein was working there. They had someone who was managing the office, and me. And I was based in the East Coast. And then it went from 20 people to 40 people to 60 people. And then it went in the other direction, of course, as time goes on.
Of course. I mean, you were given, I assume, quite a lot of creative freedom with the Seventh Guest. Can you remember what was your big inspirations and how much freedom were you given when you worked on this?
Well, when they first approached me, they had, and again, I'm working on memory here.
Yeah.
When they first approached me, they actually had a named guest and the idea of a haunted house.
Yeah.
So they wanted a haunted house story. And the concept would be that it would be puzzle-based. Now, what they also didn't know when they hired me was I had done a book called The Greatest Puzzles of All Time, which essentially was a history of puzzles. So it was just filled with classic puzzles, some of which ended up going into the game. So I basically did a script that was broken into rooms. So you had your setup. And then as the rooms open, more or less linear fashion, but sometimes I think you can get 2 different places open. Yeah. The story would fall into place as you unlocked it in an area, whether it's the kitchen or the library or this or that. And you could start to piece together the story, which is basically a satanic deal, which could lead into the sacrifice of this young boy who I believe his name is Tad.
Right.
And so then they had a script for each room, which they could link with the puzzles. And I think that in the making of book that was done by Prima, I think they have my full script. So you can actually read exactly what I wrote.
Nice.
And, you know, Rob and Graham, we'd have some script meetings about it, tweaking it. But often in games, you don't get that much freedom. But that game was like the palette was mine to play with.
It sounds like the perfect game to get yourself involved in. Is that fair to say? I mean, you couldn't really hope for much more for a start.
Yeah, well, essentially, I was doing something. For example, you know, I was paid to do it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, at least I got that going for me. You know, the check cleared because I didn't know. I said, are these guys going to be able to pull this off?
Yeah. And
then it was the sheer joy of doing it, and the joy of work. To be honest, the joy of working with them.
Yeah.
It was heady times. It wasn't quite like Meet the Beatles, but it was something like this. It was fun and excited. The sheer giddiness of doing this project we were doing. So I missed a lot of the pain because I'm programming it. I'm not making chairs align properly. So I got a lot of the fun stuff without having to do the how are we going to do this and how are we going to do this effect? How are we going to make that head jump out of the soup pot? I could write a head comes out of the soup pot, but they have to make it occur.
Yeah, so you came with the idea and you let other people get on with it. I like that.
Right, which is what screenwriters do.
Yeah.
But they have like a team of 100 people, making these things occur.
Yeah.
So, and some effects I think got dialed down, and others, like the clown with balloons, gets in there, because everyone loves clowns.
Yeah, that's right.
So it was definitely a dream project, that's for sure, which is like a great combination of passion, fun. I mean, having fun when you do stuff has always been important for me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we all have to work, we all have to make a living, but to enjoy something that much was great.
Fair enough. I mean, you've already mentioned briefly already, but working with Rob and Graham, it sounds like it was a good team. What was the atmosphere like when you're producing this game? I know you're saying you weren't completely sure it was going to be made, but was it one of the best times in your gaming industry, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I've had good and really good experiences, and some less good. But I flew out there probably 2-3 times where we would, just sort of do a Vulcan mind meld on the project and talk about different things. And then I remember one CES show we went to, and in retrospect, I could sort of label it like an Ocean's 11 moment, because I think the Fat Man was there, who did the music, of course, Rob and Graham, and we're walking down in Las Vegas, 4 across, and Graham says, "We make a pretty good team, don't we?" Because the world was our oyster, or their oyster, all of our oyster at that point, and that was a pretty great moment.
Good on you. Yeah. It sounds like you had a brilliant team and everyone sort of pulled together.
And we got to acknowledge those. Eventually, people brought in like Rob Stein's work on the game, artistically tremendous. A lot of creative people. The music, fantastic. And hopefully everyone got enough praise and financial reward for all their work, because it definitely took a village to make that game. That's for sure.
Like I said earlier, I love the game, and I'm a massive fan of adventure games, point and click games, and this kind of combined a bit of that, but in a whole different angle. And I do remember the atmosphere as well. I mean, I was probably quite young when I started playing it, truthfully, but you got that creepiness and the story. And I think Bill Gates actually said famously, this game is the new standard in interactive entertainment. I mean, was there a point when you're making this game you thought this is something special? This is going to be a game changer, and how would you reflect back on the game even now?
Well, I think there came a point when I saw that I wasn't simply getting paid for doing this, that it was getting likely. Sorry, it's my other phone. It was getting likely that it was actually going to occur.
Yeah.
And then seeing it, and since I had been a game reviewer, I saw everything, so I knew it was done. I knew what people did. And saying there's nothing like this. This is going to blow people away. And of course, the Gates quote, absolutely tremendous. And it's like the Pope saying, "This is the future." and it was. And I think a lot of people in Hollywood, and I mean, Silicon Valley wasn't what it wasn't what it was today. But, people would fly in, have meetings with them. And so it was very, very exciting. Now, a lot of that glitz and explosiveness and expansion, of course, I miss because I'm based in New York.
Yeah.
And in some ways that was fortunate. In some ways that was good, because as I said, I got to enjoy all the good stuff without dealing with difficult things, not only making it, but also difficult things perhaps to come.
I understand. With Bill Gates, it must feel pretty good that Bill Gates was a big fan of the game.
Definitely. And, I travel around the world and I speak on the games I do now, which I've been doing games since then. And I have people come and say, we used to play this game with my friends in the basement. It was so scary. And I'm talking about people in Singapore, people in Beijing. I mean, people all around the world, Australia. For a lot of people, it's a touchstone. It's something, it's an artifact. It's a bit of nostalgia.
Yeah.
But everyone remembers. And the other thing about it is that the interface that was designed, you remember the interface, the skeletal hand pointing the gesture. You could put your grandmother, as long as she wasn't Norman Bates's mother, you could put your grandmother in front of the computer. She could play the game.
Yeah, it was very accessible, wasn't it?
And of course the puzzles were tricky, but and they got trickier as the farther you went up the house to the attic. In the attic, there's actually one puzzle in the attic I don't think I can do without some help. Yeah. But the puzzles were doable and classic. And of course, then there's the acting. They hired local actors, and this local woman who was the director, who also played, I think, Martine. She directed them. So Henry Stauff was memorable. Robert Hirschberger, he did a great job. Oh wait, I probably his name wrong. Sorry. I should explain to everybody that I'm actually in the midst of the flu, but carrying on anyway.
Yeah. Do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Do you have a personal favourite puzzle in the Seven Guest Mansion? Is there one you think, I'm really proud of that, or one that you think this is the best?
I like the ones that are doable by, like most people say, I can do that. So the Canals of Mars with the telescope.
Oh, yeah.
All right. And then, which is, that puzzle is over 150 years old.
Wow.
That's an ancient puzzle. You can get my book. I think it's still in print, or get the digital copy. And that I talk about Sam Lloyd, who created that puzzle. The cake puzzle is interesting too. But the one that I had the most fun with was the grate puzzle. I mean grate, Grate.
Oh, yeah.
You're down below in the basement area, and to get through, it's a sliding block puzzle. And again, sliding block puzzles are 150 years old. This one I made up, so I remember cutting up bits of cardboard and going like that, moving it around to see whether it would work.
Yeah.
And then of course they had to take the idea of doing it, make a digital version of it. So those are three I really enjoy, because with the sliding grate puzzle, I like puzzles. I also did a book about puzzles, but I prefer when the challenges in the game are environmental, meaning so moving bits of metal to make an opening is a realistic environmental challenge.
Yeah.
So like that. Whereas like the Canals of Mars is a great puzzle looking through the telescope, but that's a puzzle. So the ones that are less puzzly, more environmental, I also like those two, and would be my preference. Though some people just like good puzzle game. Yeah. And puzzle games became, Seventh Guest, while sold tons, tremendous acclaim, it also had people saying, "Oh, this is not a game."
Oh, really?
I'm not gaming. Whatever gaming was, I'm going around solving puzzles and locking doors, and that's not a game. Well, who's to decide what a game is?
Yeah. It's certainly a different genre. I think you could argue said you helped create a new sort of gaming movement, can you, really?
Yeah, certainly. I think it took a while, but, there's been a renaissance of puzzle games over the past 5-10 years, where I think I did a talk once where I presented data on game genres, and puzzle games are number one. And I forget number two might be shooters, shooters.
The Professor Laytons, my wife's a huge fan of those, but they wouldn't be here today without, leading the groundwork. That's crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, they're definitely descendants of that. Yeah. But when this came out, there was, outside of when Myst came along, it didn't exist as a genre. And the gaming magazine, some of the people said, this is not a game. Because they had a very strict concept of what a game was. And I think a game can be anything where you're playing. I've done shooters.
Yeah.
Lord knows I did Doom 3, so I've done shooters. Yeah. I know what that's like. But a game is a game. It's where you play, and you're playing with stuff, and this happens to be a digital game.
Yeah. I'd agree. So, I want to talk about the 11th Hour, the sequel. Sequel. How did that opportunity come about? Was it something that came quite organically? Was it your suggestion? Or?
Well, again, the story was mine.
Yeah.
With collaborating again with Rob and Graham. And the script was mine. The houses, of course, it's years later.
Yep.
So I can remember one interesting point about that, saying to them, the house would have no electricity. It would have no lighting. Can we do a flashlight? I think initially Graham said, I don't know if we can do a flashlight. And then the next day he said, yeah, I think I figured a way we can do it. So there is a flashlight effect in that game.
Yeah.
And of course, some of the action, a good portion of the action, that story, which is basically we're detectives on the trail of what happened back then to those people and what happened to that boy, takes place outside the house. So in a way, it was a more robust and challenging idea for a sequel. I think commercially, in terms of expediency today, you'd say, let's just do a Seventh Guest 2.
Yeah.
New story, new house, new, and you could have actually gotten out much faster. 11th Hour took a long time, and midway or partial way in its production, you'd have to talk to Rob and Graham about this. Windows came in, and so it had to be made Windows, because before Seventh Guest was for PC, it wasn't for Windows, it was MS-DOS, and now they have to make something work with Windows, so that delayed it longer. So catching that wave of Seventh Guest love, it was years later.
Yeah.
So, right? And it's a different kind of game, and it's a different kind of game partially because I think, and honestly, the story I told and some of the characters, there's a waitress there who has a prosthetic arm. It's a darker tale.
Yeah.
Seventh Guest is a gothic, spooky. It's like an amusement park ride. 11th Hour is a little darker. They also brought a professional director in who darkened that further.
Yeah.
And so, So that's, and so some people I think respond to that not only to the delay, but also to the material being different. And the puzzles got considerably harder. So it was an ambitious, different tone sequel.
Yeah.
And, people always ask about Seventh Guest. They don't ask as much about 11th Hour because that love, they didn't have that sense of love for it, I think.
Is it true that a few R-rated scenes were cut on the 11th Hour? You say it's quite a dark, really dark game, but could it have been even darker if you kept everything in?
Yes, there was material, and I'm not sure if that material was actually in my script.
Right. That
was definitely R-rated. So it was ambitious. I mean, I'm trying to think the year this came out, whether Twin Peaks was running. So there was a feeling of pushing the envelope in that regard. So it was being pushed. I think that got cut, but that definitely you would have said, if there's nudity and even there's, more graphic gore. Well, there's no graphic gore really in Seventh Guest, but there was some graphic gore, but that was certainly dialed down. And a lot of that occurred, I think, in the script development process, which was a different script development process than I had with Seventh Guest.
Right. Was there any discussions at all that there'd be another sort of game in the series? Is 11th Hour obviously that's the final kind of one in the series? Was it ever a sequel planned?
I think that 11th Hour I believe numerically did well. It was based on royalties I got. It seemed to do well. It didn't do as well as Seventh Guest. And at that point, Trilobite had become a large company.
Yep.
And it was diversifying in various ways. Different games being developed. They start working on Tender Loving Care with that same director, which is going to be a highly cinematic game. And also groundbreaking how it's going to be looking at people. So the idea of doing a third one, I think, perhaps again, you'd have to check with Rob and Graham. Perhaps the demand wasn't there, but also I think creatively they want to move on. I was working on a game for them that was set in Antarctica.
Wow.
That was going to be science fiction horror. And I was working with a producer there named Kellen Beck, who we we're developing, we're building the game. It was basically going to be using sort of a seventh guest 11th hour template to tell a story about genetic manipulation and terror in Antarctica.
Right. Sounds a bit like The Thing, a little bit.
Well, it does. I'm inspired. I did two novels that are, one is opens in Antarctica.
Yeah.
And another book sort of touches on that. But I'm a big fan of the original story The Thing is based on, by John Campbell, who goes there. The original black and white Thing, and of course John Carpenter's Thing.
Yeah.
A lot of nice things there. So I've been and there's H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness, which is one of probably his greatest work. Certainly close to his greatest work, which is set entirely in Antarctica. So this idea of doing this with a science base up there would have been a lot of fun. I mean, there was the science sketches, there were creatures, but at that point, their resources, and here's where you have to, I think, probably go online. Someone did a whole oral history of the rise and fall of Trilobite, which is probably floating out there on the internet.
Yeah.
Sort of documents this period. So this project, which had been very cool, went so far, and then
it's a shame. On ice, literally.
On ice, forever.
Yeah,
forever frozen in ice.
Didn't have a name at all.
But the thing is, as a creative person, you move on.
Yeah.
And, it opened a lot of doors for me. And I would say I've done a lot of projects that haven't happened, but also done a lot of projects that have. And you just sort of have to roll with it.
Do you reckon if you could choose one project you wish was released or could resurrect, would you choose the Antarctica story? If you could.
Oh, that's an interesting question. See, I'd actually have to clear my flu-ridden head to,
yeah.
Because, if you're talking across media, I had a TV series set up with the BBC with my co-writer Neil Richards that we had a shooting schedule in Prague.
Oh, really?
It was a time travel series. And then a series of bad things happened. The Canadian co-partner went bankrupt or something.
Oh.
Prague got flooded. That didn't happen. So I have a good number of those in the television area. In terms of games, it's after that. I mean, I think most of the games I really cared about got made.
Yeah.
I would say that's probably the game I would like to have seen that didn't get made. I had some games that were like, for example, I did the Aladdin game for Disney, and at one point that was in complete jeopardy because it was Robin Williams was in it. It was going to be very expensive, and it was going to be a beautiful game. And Michael Eisner said, "Let's do it." They did it. I think they lost a ton of money because it cost $5 million to make, and
it's a great game. So you're involved. You're involved in the platforming game. Okay.
Yeah, I've done some things that have been platform. So I'm kind of eclectic. Where if something creatively interests me, I was flown out to California to meet with Team Barbie.
Yeah.
You know Barbie? She's blonde, wears heels. Barbie.
Yeah.
So, and I go in a room. I'm the only male there, and they're doing this game, which is going to be both for platform and for PC. Barbie's Writing Club. But they have no story. They have nothing of interest happening. So they hired me to just brainstorm for a day or two. And then after that, they said, "Would you write it?"
Wow.
And then I wrote it. And then I made classic Barbie mistakes, which is Barbie comes to the trail and there's branches on the trail. And she gets off the horse to clear the trail. And I said, "Well, no, Barbie doesn't do this." Barbie, back then, now Barbie, these days, she'd probably pick up a flamethrower
yeah.
like Ripley from Alien.
Yeah.
But back then, she didn't do that. So, and also I did a Hercules game. Yeah. And by the way, I just triggered something. You made me think about games that didn't happen.
Yeah.
I got pretty knee deep with Disney in doing what would be a Haunted Mansion game.
Wow.
Did the backstage tour of the Haunted Mansion ride.
Wow.
And because that's one of their iconic rides and attractions worldwide. And I said, this could be really a lot of fun. Sort of like a seventh guest 15 years on or so, but with, and the thing is with Disney, there's your boss. The next day, where'd he go?
Yeah.
the guy who's doing it with is, don't ask.
That's a
He
shame.
sleeps with the fishes tonight. No, I'm kidding. He didn't say fishy. He's alive and breathing.
Yeah. Oh man, that sounds incredible. That could have been I don't know if it was aimed at children. That could have been like a whole different a whole different sort of audience for your sort of puzzle game, couldn't it?
Yeah, and I forget the game mechanics you're exploring, but it was going to be certainly a mix of some puzzle based, but also then I would lobby that we can make the puzzles environmental.
Yeah.
Like there's sets of keys and which key opens which door and how does that lock work and how do classic stuff that a game would use, but use the whole there's a whole amazing backstory to Haunted Mansion. Well, it's not that amazing, but pretty amazing. And there's all these characters. Once I got into it, I said, there's like everything with Disney, there's a whole universe there. So that was fun. But I learned, some things happened. Aladdin happened. Haunted Mansion didn't. But who knows? Maybe someday it'll come back.
I hope it does. Right, final question on the sort of 7th guest era. Then we move on to Doom, if that's all right. If Rob and Graham approached you tomorrow and they said, "Look, Matt, let's sit down. Let's try and get a whole new 7th guest game, or try and reboot the originals, maybe," would that be something that would interest you?
Well, the first thing I can say, that's never going to happen.
Right. Fair enough.
For various reasons, that will not occur.
Yeah.
And there was a 7th guest reboot, not a reboot, but a sequel being explored. At one point, I had said I would work on that, and then at another point, I said I wouldn't work on it. And the reason I wouldn't work on it is it's about relationships. In other words, if you're going to spend a year working on something, a year and a half, I love Rob and Graham to bits.
Yeah.
We're blood brothers to the end, I hope they think that way too, because of what we've been through. But, if I'm going to be working with someone that I know that that exceeds my limits. So because of that, I basically had to pull away from that project. So I did. It didn't fly ultimately.
Yeah.
But there's a fan group that I've been in touch with, and they got a green light from Rob to do a fan-based sequel called The 13th Doll.
Oh, nice.
So that's impressive. And the graphics and I think they all work in the game business, so they're doing this on the side, almost out of love. And the only other thing is, I think everybody should know that coming this July, there'll be the 7th guest board game, which emerged when I was talking to Rob about something. I said, Kickstarter board games get funded like in 2 hours.
Yeah.
The fan base for board games is very large. And sure enough, he put the 7th guest board game up there. So this July, he went and he did. It's going to have little figures of the characters. I can't wait to see that.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
That does sound really good. I'll be checking it out. Don't you worry about that. Right, Doom 3, another huge game you're involved in. The Doom franchise is absolutely amazing. How did this opportunity come about? And were you a big fan of Doom before you started working on it?
Well, being a reviewer, I had seen the Wolfenstein and Doom, so I knew those games, and this is back when they were very basic graphically. The first, but still certainly fun to play, and that actually came about because Graham Devine from Trilobite got hired by id Software in Mesquite, Texas. And they apparently were looking for a writer. And I believe they had never really worked with a writer before. And he said, well, why not meet Matt? Maybe that's a writer you could work with. So they flew me out to Mesquite, Texas, and I met with John Carmack. I guess everybody knows who John Carmack is. Legend. If not, you can Google him. Headed the company. Yeah. Also the guy who designs the game engines, and along with his team. And spent a day or two there. He interviewed me, probed me, got a feeling for, how I'd be to work with, and also what I could provide in terms of services. And then they hired me. And the remit essentially was to fill out the game, because Doom 3 was going to be graphic. It's going to be like a full-fledged game world. But what is that world? What is the mythos? how do these monsters get here? Where, how does hell connect with the transporter machine? What's going on Mars? What are the bases in Mars? Yeah. So, building that whole world in what's called the Bible, that was, part of my job remit. The other part would be, of course, scripting the stuff for, actual dialogue. And there's a lot of information these are early days of PDAs, but a lot of information on handheld PDAs the characters would carry about family back home, sort of deepening the emotional part of the story, and also creating some sort of arc to what happens over the game. It's while still remaining true to the fact that essentially you're going in and shooting many of these creatures from hell as you can so you can get to the big spider mind and destroy him. So that was great fun. I mean, completely different experience. And I work with producer Tim Willits, who was the producer / designer of the game. And we met out there. Then he came to New York and we had meetings here and talked through it. And then did the script. He edited the script. And then Doom 3 came out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great game. I mean, so it wasn't your idea to set it on Mars as such. You were given that, but you had to sort of fill in the gaps, I suppose. Is that right?
Yeah, again, I'm working on memory here. But my guess is Mars was in place, and the basic Doom story was in place about, monster creatures from hell. But I then worked on how do we get to Mars? How do we travel to Mars? What's the status? I created the organization. You'd have to go look it up. I think it's like United Aerospace Corporation that actually has it's not a faster than light speed, but it's a near light speed engine, so it can get to Mars in a speedy way, and sort of built that world. What is good? How big is the development of Mars? How are they connected? How often people outside? How do they travel? So on and so forth. Yeah. And every now and then I look at that Bible because it's always when I'm doing a new project, I say, well, what are the categories I hit in that? Because it's like a tutorial for myself because I don't necessarily remember, but I say, oh yeah, I covered that, I did this, I did that, and yep.
Oh, nice one. Was Doom your personal favourite first-person shooter back in the day, or was there you're a big fan of that genre? Matt?
Let's see. Well, I'm trying to think of the sequence. I had done a Vietnam game for Guerrilla Games called Shell Shock NAM 67. And I think I did that before. And that was the first time I did something that was going to involve a lot of gunplay. Yeah. One of the differences was I wanted to make sure that all the characters there were real characters, sort of like watching Platoon. So not just random people dying. And the company got access to using a lot of the music of the era. So there's a lot of great vintage Roy Orbison, people like that in the soundtrack. But that was the first time I was dealing with a lot of gunplay. And, so that was a little bit stretching. And I had to mesh it. I've done gunplay in books. When zombies are coming at you, it's good to have something to take them out with. Yeah. But not in the game. But Doom 3, obviously a whole different story because the weaponry is very important. And to be honest, other than saying that these people are armed, the actual weapons, the design of them, the selection, the upgrades, that obviously was handled all internally by id. But in terms of my experience, having played Doom, hadn't played Wolfenstein, I knew the form of the genre. I knew why people liked it. Yeah. And it actually isn't that much different than, say, Duck Hunt from the old Nintendo Entertainment.
Yeah,
it's like, it's not that much different, So, yeah.
That's a good answer. Your work on Doom 3, was that used to help create the Doom film with Dwayne Johnson? Is that true?
Well, this is what I was told by Tim Willits. And I could check with him, and because I'm relying on memory again. But he said, they used a lot of your stuff from your thing you've done in the Doom 3 film, which I'm not sure I should actually brag about because I've seen the film. And considering how beloved the Doom franchise is, the film was disappointing.
Yeah.
But that's what Tim Willits said at the time. And And also, they did a follow-up which used some of the stuff to do Doom Resurrection, which was sort of the add-on to Doom 3.
Mm. No, good. Tough question, but can you run us through a typical day of writing a story for a video game, and what's your big inspirations? How would you explain your sort of a typical day?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd say there is no typical day.
Yeah.
Every project I seem to do in terms of the game world is different. I wouldn't say it's quite reinventing the wheel, but not fairly recently, I finished Planet of the Apes: Last Frontier.
Yeah.
And that whole process and that whole game, vastly different. Controversial reception, but vastly different. But essentially, it starts with what you do for any writing medium, like a novel or screenplay. It comes with the idea. When I write, for my home, I'll go jogging, running, and just let thoughts come. I'll start taking notes. I'll start building up ideas and then once you have a jumble of stuff sort of fermenting there, of things you'd like to include in this game world you're building, then you got to sort of like discipline it and organize it. So you start building a template. What are these things we want to cover and handle? And then it's like, a blank canvas, so the characters start getting built. The places start getting built. Sometimes the plot may come first. Sometimes you may want to get the world in place because that's going to suggest plot. They sort of go back and forth. Plot is going to influence world, and world's going to influence plot, and then character is going to interact with both of them. So it's a lot of notepads, a lot of old school, just scrolling things down, sometimes doing simple pictures, which I'll show nobody because it's just for me, and then start creating the documents that are needed. And the documents grow you might start with a 2-pager.
Yeah.
And you want to get feedback. Does everyone feel cool about this? They feel this is the game story and the game world. Everyone's, and that grows to a 5-pager, then a 10-pager, then a 100-pager. And so eventually, I think with Planet of the Apes, Last Frontier, which I wrote again with Neil Richards, I think, we probably had 400, 500 pages of script.
Wow.
Doing that. But it started out, again, 2 or 3 people meeting in Ealing in London, talking about what kind of game we want to make for this world. So every project is different, and I think that's why I find it so refreshing, is that you can't simply say, oh, we're doing a game. I think companies need to be wary of that, because they say, we did this game, well, we're just going to do another game, we're going to follow the same form. I think you can really got to see what's going to make the beast behave well. And it may be a different structure, maybe tackling it from a different angle than you did from the last project.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that, yeah. Is there a project or game that you think, this is my best work, I'm so proud of this? Is there a point you look back and think, this is where I've really reached my top top level? Yeah,
okay, so I would say that I'll give you 4 or 5 or 6.
Yeah.
He said it modestly. Well, first of all, Seventh Guest, obviously.
Yeah.
And, but that, in a way, it's almost beginner's luck, but forever proud of that. Doom 3, I feel like to work with that franchise at that point, to work with a team where they were taking a leap of faith and really working with a writer, that was tremendous. And it's very collaborative. One thing Doom 3 and Seventh Guest share is an openness to ideas, and an openness to talk. Nobody's egos on display. We're just there to make the best game we can. Doom 3 certainly, and Zoom Disney, which was a project I did for the Disney Channel. They wanted to rebrand the Disney Channel.
Yeah.
At that point, it was all like Winnie the Pooh for little kids, and they want to start. So we created something called Zoog Disney, Zoog Disney, with all these characters, and it's way ahead of its time because basically during the week, kids would put their comments and scores online. During the week, before the weekend, we would then put it on the screen with the shows, so it would run along almost as though they're interacting with the program, their scores in the games, their comments, and so forth. And it ran for about 1.5 years, 2 years. that changed the channel. And the thing is, we were doing something that now is dead easy to do, but back then it was crazy because it was a week turnaround process, interviewing people, getting scores, getting the information, getting it ready to go out. I did it with F. Paul Wilson, who's another writer of horror and science fiction and suspense. I did FTL News on the Sci-Fi Channel for 6 years. And that's a whole epic story of its own, but 6 years of writing a 1-minute daily newscast from the future. And it ran for 6 years, and we had a blast. We built up the future world. We made up nations. We created characters. We got people that we liked or were just curious about to play characters. So we had other writers come in. We had Timothy Leary do a role. We had the magician, the amazing Kreskin, do one. At some point, we needed an alien who comes in an asteroid. I ended up being that alien and acting with this actress from the USA Network. So that was a blast. That was a creative high point, to be sure. And the recent Planet of the Apes was probably one of the best creative projects I've done, period, because we're starting with nothing other than the Planet of the Apes universe and the movies, and building our own story, essentially a new game format, feeding off some other things, and watching that grow again from a couple of people in a room to a whole. And that, as I said, I did that with my co-writer Neil Richards, and our producer was Martin Alltimes, and he showed real bravery and vision in forging ahead with that game. And some of the people out there, some reviewers have actually loved it, and some people are aghast at it. It's almost, in a way, it almost bookends with Seventh Guest saying it's not a game.
Yeah.
Because in a way they have a point. It's a movie where you're going to change what happens in that movie, but every 30 seconds by making a decision.
Wow.
Every 30 seconds, and every decision counts. Every decision is weighed. In a way, I think people don't see that when they play that game, that all these little decisions are going to accrue with some bigger decisions later and lead to the apes being wiped out, the humans being wiped out. So I love that project. It was challenging, difficult. Again, it was doing something I hadn't been done before, as far as I can tell.
Ahead of its time, it sounds like, definitely.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
So there's a few.
Yeah.
There's a few that I'm pretty happy about.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, I'm very proud of those, definitely. Obviously, you've worked in many medias, books, films, TV, and of course games. Is there a personal favourite out of all those you like working in?
Well, yeah, that's interesting too, because I mean, I love writing fiction.
Yeah.
I've done like 20, 25, 30, I don't know, a lot of novels.
Yeah.
And I'm currently doing a mystery series set in the Cotswolds called Cherringham, which is written with my co-writer who's based in England. So he actually knows, I know England pretty well too, but he's actually English. And that's done for Bastille. It's become a bestseller. They've sold, I think 330,000 copies last check, and an equal number of audio books. So it's been a bestseller, and they're mysteries. I love mysteries. So fiction I certainly adore, but it's also good to get away from the screen and go into a room with a bunch of people and brainstorm and create. I mean, it's almost like shock treatment. You leave your bunny slippers at home and your cup of tea, and you're in a room of creative people when you're making a game. So the balance to me has always been wonderful. I would not like to have had only one.
Yeah.
Most of my writer friends do one thing or the other, but to have both of them, it's really great, because you can have that pleasure of taking a cup of tea and writing a really scary scene on your Mac, something really terrifying for a book. And then a week later, now you're talking about people and you're taking down notes and you're building up a game world, working on a video game. But they're very, very different, but they're both great.
Brilliant. That sounds top answer there. Obviously you're a gamer outside, you like playing games as well. Mm-hmm. It's a tough question, but what are your top 3 video games of all time?
Well, I've been I'm enjoying the new Wolfenstein.
Yeah.
So the current game is one I really like. I have to say, if we're talking video games like video games, I think the Zelda Link games, that whole arc of them, especially the new one for Nintendo Switch.
Breath of the Wild, yeah. I'm a huge fan.
It's wonderful. But going back in time, I'm trying to think about this game that I still think about. I think I mentioned the Aliens game from Activision, which people should check out.
Yeah.
Because it's just a game. But there was a game that used vector graphics. It had I'm trying to think of what it was. And this is like 25 years ago, and you were piloting a ship. So it's all these, white laser-like lines of ships that you're navigating and fighting. And it had a name like Excel. I can't remember what it was called. But I love that. And to be honest with you, I enjoyed Myst. I think Myst is equally a classic game. And so those are the few, but staying current is hard. And I'll also be honest here. I think I told you I started with role-playing games and board games.
Yeah.
I'm a hardcore board gamer, specifically historical games.
What's your favorite board game then, if you don't mind asking?
Well, I'll give you 4. Tide of Iron, which is wonderful. Memoir 44, but only if I use the rules I created to adapt it. Which I said, okay, I like this game a lot, but I'm going to change the rules a bit here.
Yeah.
The Conflict of Heroes is a wonderful game system.
Yeah.
And even the Axis and Allies miniatures. I wasn't a big miniatures fan because it involves measuring and so forth, but I've been getting into that because the little figures get to have their own little life. And there's something about the tactile nature of board games I love.
Yeah.
I love that you pick up a piece and move, and I hope that does. I think it's as I said before, it has a renaissance, so I think it's here to stay. But those games occupy, when I'm not writing and I'm not cooking and I'm not jogging, I'm going to be over there moving armies. It's right in my office. I turn around. I don't have one now because I'm flying tonight, but I would have a map out there and have figures out there.
Oh, no. Brilliant answer. I have to check some of those board games out. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. A bit of a random question. If you could be transported into any game you helped create, which game would you choose and why? If you could actually live in, maybe stay for a day in one of your video game creations.
Yeah, okay.
Would you choose a mansion?
Obviously, it would be seventh guess because that doesn't turn out well for most of the people.
Yeah.
Or Planet of the Apes, people lose people, so I probably wouldn't care to do that. I mean, depending on how you play it, one of the main characters can lose their son. Yeah. Which is a real emotional loss. So I'd want something that's sort of lighthearted. So I'm not going to feel any. So I'd probably go with either Just Cause 1 and Just Cause 2, where I can do just about anything. Yeah. I can lasso helicopters and go swinging over here, and it doesn't seem like I ever get shot. So so that would be, and it's fun, and it has that sort of bubbly James Bond feel to it a little bit, even though it's not a spy world.
You're not tempted by Barbie World then, no?
No, I don't think so.
Before I say I've got really just 2 or 3 really quick fire questions. What projects or games are you currently working on? Are you allowed to reveal some things here, or?
Well, normally you NDA'd. So I'm currently in some discussions about doing a game which will be running out of a company in Europe, about which I can say nothing.
Yes.
And there's a possibility of another game, perhaps with some of the people that we did Planet of the Apes with. We've had some meetings, discussions about other IP. So those things are 2 things that are in play right now.
That sounds interesting. Good stuff. Bit of a bizarre question as well. You share the name of quite a famous basketball player. Is that correct?
Yeah. What's funny is, like, my name pops up. You couldn't especially a good writer of game. But he obviously has been a pretty successful basketball player.
Have you ever met him at all, Matthew Costello?
No, I wish he'd go away. Actually, I mean, he probably wish I'd go away.
Yeah.
I got this writer he pops up when he pops up, and I've also lately, because I haven't decided whether maintaining an up-to-date website's important to me.
Right.
So I've sort of let that go. And my son, who's young, he says, don't worry about updating your website. There's enough stuff on it that if you want to see things you've done, it's all there. But I probably will do something like that. But yeah, I know. I have not met the basketball player, sad to say.
Are you a fan of his? I don't know what team he plays for, but oh man, it must be very weird.
No, and basketball, to be honest, is my least favorite sport. I'm not big on sports anyway. I mean, I like to stay fit and all that.
Yeah.
But no, I can get into baseball. Rarely can I get into American football. But basketball, to me, it looks like they're just passing the ball and dribbling for 2 hours. And then someone wins by 1 point.
Yeah, fair enough. I'd agree.
So I'd say, UK football, soccer, European soccer, that I have admiration for that game. There's a beauty and elegance there.
Oh, I'm a big football fan, actually. Yeah, soccer, as you call it.
Yeah.
Do you come to the UK quite a lot then?
Yeah, I'll probably be over there in May where Neil Richards and I are cooking up a new series, and I can't say anything more than that.
Yeah.
So we're planning to do, and we like to get together and find a setting where something would take place, and then brainstorm, make up story ideas, and build our world. So that'll be in May. But I would say last year I was over like 4, 5, 6 times.
Nice. That's brilliant. Right, before I say goodbye then, Matt, the final question. If you could share a few drinks with any video game character, who would you choose and why?
Well, I got to be careful how I answer this, don't I?
I've asked this to so many people.
If I said Lara Croft,
yeah, that comes up all the time.
You know what I mean?
That comes up all the time. That is. If I had a drink every time I heard that, I'd be on the floor right now. Trust me.
Right. Well, of course, with Lara Croft, you would behave yourself.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think. Let me try to think of. There's a guy in the Just Cause games called Sheldon.
Right.
And he's like a crazy CIA guy he runs Rico Rodriguez, who's the character we made up, who's the hero of the Just Cause games. And I think there's a movie in development for that too. And Sheldon is his operative. But Sheldon wears a Hawaiian shirt. He's always mixing drinks. I mean, this is all a lark for him.
Yeah. So
he'd be a larger than life. And the guy who did the voice work for him in the first Just Cause game was just fantastic. This big, booming, fun voice.
Yeah. So
meeting him at the Hemingway bar in Paris, the drinks on his dime, because the drinks are expensive there.
Yeah.
That would be good.
That's a brilliant answer.
He's a good character.
Oh man, that's a brilliant answer. Thank you. Look, I really appreciate your time today. It's been such an honour to talk to you. Such interesting stories.
Well, great. I have to say, great questions. There were some questions today that I haven't had before, which is always fun.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Hope my answers were relatively clear, all things considered.
No, honestly, it's such a pleasure. Look, I'll say goodbye, and I hope we can speak in the future. But take care, Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much for the interview. Appreciate it.